Sometimes Visual Studio does not behave the way you expect it to. In fact, believe it or not, sometimes you might come across a bug in Visual Studio. So what do you do when you find one of those bugs? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you what I believe is a bug in Visual Studio. Now, I may be wrong. It may be something on my machine or something else. We'll talk through those different possibilities. I'm going to show you what I have done to report this issue, okay? Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. And part of that learning C# is learning how to deal with Visual Studio and the tools that surround C#. And this is one of those videos. So in this video, you won't see source code, which you normally find in the description. And you won't see any kind of practice for you to do necessarily until you come across one of these bugs yourself. But this is really important to know how to do. So I'm creating a special video just to focus on this, okay? So let's go right to Visual Studio, and I'm going to show you where I see a bug. Now, this bug happens to be in Visual Studio 2019 Enterprise Edition, which is not the free edition. This is the paid edition, and it's using one of the paid features. And this paid features, what you see here are the red X's and the green check marks. This is live unit testing. So under tests, you see live unit testing, and I have it turned on currently. Now, what I've experienced, and I'll see if I can replicate it, does not happen every time, but when I remove some of these statements, and then I go to start typing, what happens sometimes, that one worked, but sometimes what happens is when I remove a statement and I start typing, it crashes live unit testing. Okay, so return new list of coin model. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's part of the frustrating part of bugs, is when you can't reproduce them reliably, it's hard to say, okay, here is the issue. Now let's put this not implement exception back, and let's come up here. Let's save that code. We're going to come here, and I'm going to delete this code, and we'll see if we can get this to crash at least once. Now, every time I put my cursor down here, oops, there we go. Return 0, that's fine. And then down here, let's do it again. And we're going to say return 0. Somewhere in here, it's going to throw an exception. I have not been able to figure out what the pattern is yet. But sometimes what will happen, and this is not a warning we need to worry about, but sometimes what will happen is it'll crash the live unit testing, and we'll get this error in the output. Now notice in the output window, I have live unit testing selected. All right, and it gives us this error, and it says the start execution, and then in here somewhere you'll see there's my error. I think right there. Nope, those are fine. There's an exception in here somewhere. There we go, right there. So you see this exception that happened. So if I can't replicate it, at least you'll see this. So you'll see that this argument exception, supplied snapshot point, is on an incorrect snapshot. What does that mean? I think it has something to do with snapshots. I'm not quite sure. And I'm not quite sure why this error is occurring. But this is really important information to give the developers. Okay? So, like I said, this only happens once in a... There we go. It just happened. Notice how my red X's and check marks are gone? This is a perfect time to not do any more than this and to start submitting this bug. Because I just had it happen. So to submit a bug, what you're going to do is in the upper right-hand corner. Now I'm using the preview version, but it's also happened on the full version as well, the not preview version. So in the upper right-hand corner, and let's zoom in here. There's this icon right here that says Send Feedback. if you click this button and say report a problem, okay? Now the cool thing is there's also a suggest a feature. So if you have something where you say, you know what, it would be really cool if. Now, I will say here that if you have a suggestion, try and make it something that's not massive, okay? So if you say something like, it'd be really cool if you made Visual Studio load in 1 second, okay? That probably won't happen. That's a lot of work, okay? And that might not happen. Now, they've done a lot of stuff for optimizing loading Visual Studio. But maybe if you said something like, it'd be really cool if the snippets were here, okay? Maybe a little closer to actually using them. Or maybe you find that there's one little tweak you want to see in Visual Studio. Great place to add that suggestion. Be very clear in your suggestion what you're asking for, okay? And that's the same thing that's going to happen here when we report a problem. We get very clear as to what the problem is. So let's click on this. Now zoom back out. And this window pops up. Now, I've already submitted this problem. And that's right here. But I want to kind of walk through the process of what I did to submit this issue. Okay? Now you can see I have submitted multiple problems. The really cool thing is we have solutions for these problems. For the 2 I've submitted, this one hasn't gotten a solution yet, but it does have some work that's been done on it, and it was over Christmas break. So I'm not expecting that developers are working over Christmas break to fix my particular issue. All right? So let's look to submit a new issue. Now, I'm not going to actually submit it because I don't want to duplicate my submission, but I'm going to walk you through this process. So, report a new problem. So you click this purple button up here, and we start with one of the most important pieces, and that's the title of your problem. Be very clear in this title. Do not use titles like something doesn't work or I get an error. Okay? Those are horrible titles because it does not tell the user or not tell the reader exactly what's happening. Okay? So my title was Live Unit Testing Crashes. Now I debated, and I kind of went back and forth and kind of tweaked that a little bit and thought through alternate titles to try and communicate more, but I ended up at this level. And the reason why is I wanted to communicate exactly what's happening, but I didn't want to have something in the title that was misleading. I think it has something to do with the fact that it says dash references here. CodeLens is not loading properly. And it says loading references for this method, Alt+2. I think that has something to do with that issue, but I'm not sure. It may be totally different, may have nothing to do with that. And so if I said live unit testing crashes when CodeLens is loading, that might not be accurate. So I don't want to put too much information in here that is just guesswork. So I'm going to try to be very clear. This is live unit testing and it crashes. Okay? That's really the only things that I know for certain. Now, my description. I'm going to go ahead and copy this from my actual description. Okay? And I'll paste it in here. So this is my description, and it did swallow some line entries. Okay, so let's put those line entries back. Let's come back here. And I believe there's no one right here. Oops. There we go. So let's talk through what I put in here. First of all, I put a very clear description of what I'm doing and what happened. So when working on my project, when I changed the output of a method from throw new not implement exception to quote unquote real code, right after I remove the exception and start typing, live unit test crashes, but not every time. If I restart a few times, sometimes it gives me a method or two before it crashes again, as you saw. So that's what I observed. Now, let's talk about what I did. I restarted Visual Studio, and I tried the preview version, which is what we're using right now, of Visual Studio. Neither solution worked. So a restart didn't work, and neither did a different edition of Visual Studio 2019. I also did a project rebuild. Okay, so I rebuilt my code. Now, if you're not familiar with what a project rebuild does, is it actually deletes all of the bin directory information. So it gets rid of the debug folder and the release folder, and it cleans that stuff out and it starts over. That way, there's not any lingering code that might still be hanging around that shouldn't be. So I tried that. That didn't work. Now, I also point out what I noticed. I did notice that CodeLens does not seem to be working for this file. It says it's still loading to press Alt+2, which seems to do nothing, indicating I tried it. So again, that may be a red herring. It may be a wild goose chase. We are going down a path that means nothing, but it might be important. So I wanted to include that as things I noticed. Finally, I also included the information from the output window, that error message. And here's a thing that people often forget. Error messages are important. They communicate something. If you tell me my code has an error, that gives me no context. I can't help you. But if you say my code has an error and here's what the error is, then I have a much better chance of helping you out. In this case, the output from the error message for CodeLens says fatal error, system argument exception. That's kind of important. The supplied snapshot point is on incorrect snapshot at, and then it explains where in the code that's happening. Well, this right here, the supplied snapshot point is an incorrect snapshot. That's probably really specific. Okay, I don't know what that means, but I bet that points to a very specific point in this code, and it tells the developers a lot about where this exception is happening. Maybe not why, but at least where. So now I've given them a lot less code to look through for CodeLens or for live unit testing. And I said, okay, here's a specific place to look. This is what's going on. And so now it's much more likely they can diagnose what this problem is. Now, with that, and here's my steps that I tried, so they know, okay, did you restart your Visual Studio? Did you do a rebuild? These are the things that you should be doing beforehand to make sure that's not your problem. And then also a little bit about my circumstances. Here's the things that I was doing will help them reproduce the error. Because if they can't reproduce the error, there's very little way for them to fix the error. If they can't reproduce it, how do they know when they fixed it? They really don't. And so I have to give them as much information as possible to hopefully allow them to reproduce this error. So this is what it looks like to create a good error report. If you don't include this type of information, you're making it harder and harder for someone to help you. So if you really want help, you need to put in the effort, okay? So if you just say, hey, live unit testing is crashing, okay? That gives no context, that gives no help, and you know what? You're probably going to get your request closed as not enough information. And sometimes people get frustrated by that. They say, Microsoft has no help. They don't give you any help. They don't help you out with your problems. They just, want to make money off Visual Studio. Well, first of all, you're probably using a free version of Visual Studio. So that's not true. But also, you didn't do any work. Do the work, okay? Be very careful. Think through this process. Don't just decide, I'm going to just crank something out real quick and hope that it's somebody else's problem for them to fix and that they'll magically know how to fix it. That's not how this works. You put the effort in first. I spent a lot of time working on this and diagnosing this. I tried to reproduce it in different ways. I tried to make sure it wasn't my machine. And when I couldn't figure out any other thing to try, then I documented that here very clearly. And I also included as much information as possible about the error itself. The better your error report is, the more likely it is your problem will be resolved. Right? I want to be very clear on this. The better your report is, the more likely it is you get help. So don't complain. Make a better report. All right. So once you've filled out and you're very careful with the title, make sure it's very descriptive. And then you've gone through and put as much information, as much detail as possible in this report. Then what you can do, you can use bold and italics and code sections and stuff like that if you need to. I didn't feel I needed to for this, but you could if it makes sense to make something pop. All right. So once you've done that, then hit next. And you can include a screenshot if you like. You can attach additional files that might be helpful. In my case, it doesn't seem to be really helpful. You can also do a recording. Now, what this recording does is if you can reproduce the issue, you can start a recording by clicking Start Recording, and then you can reproduce the issue so it crashes again, and then stop the recording. It'll compile that recording, and it will include it with this report. That's really helpful. Now, in my case, for some reason, my computer's having a hard time creating those recordings. I'm not sure. It may be because I'm also recording my screen for you at this time. So that might be the reason why. Maybe there's a conflict there. I'm not quite sure. Now, a video would be helpful, but it doesn't give them all of the background information about what's going on inside Visual Studio. So it's not quite the same thing as a video. Now, this recording is going to go to Microsoft, but your attachments will be private to Microsoft, meaning they're not going to post this on the internet. You're not all of a sudden open sourcing your code because you had an error report. Okay, so don't worry about that. However, do check with your legal department if you work at a company and make sure that you can submit a bug with some attached source code or recording to help Microsoft out. If you can't, then don't. Okay? So note that, but do note that you're not making this public, even though your actual bug will be made public. Okay? So username, title, and description, that's in the first page. Those will be public on the developer community page. But the data you're collecting here will not be public. Neither will the screenshots or other attachments. Now, this recording only records this Visual Studio instance. It's not recording my whole screen. So just note that's the case. Okay? So that's what's going on here. If you want to submit something like that, that'd be great if you can. Now, either way, once you're done, hit Next. This is a summary of your application. It does say attach system logs. You can uncheck that if you don't want to, but I really encourage you, if you can, give the developers as much information as possible. You don't want them playing this game of Clue. We're trying to hunt down and figure out what's going on, while blindfolded and, in a dark room. You want them to have the lights on. You want to have them give it the best vision possible so they can focus right on your problem. Okay? So attach the system logs if you can. And when you're done, hit Submit. Now again, I've already submitted this. So let's look at a couple of pieces of information. First of all, this developer community, I now have, I had before, but this is replicating what I would have, this live unit testing crashes bug report. You also get an email. The email is going to look like this. Okay? And it says, Tim reported a new problem. That's my login name, Tim. And it says, okay, the new problem, live unit testing crashes has been reported by Tim on developer community. And here's the information. You can also click here to view the problem. This is just the email saying, yep, you submitted a problem. After a bit, you will get another email that looks something like this, where it says the Visual Studio feedback system changed the status of the following problems. That's this problem right here, to triaged, meaning they have initially looked at it and put it in the right category, essentially. That's pretty much all they've done. All right. Now, again, part of this is remember that real people are behind this process. This is not going to be something where you submit an issue and it's going to be resolved within minutes or even hours. This is going to take some time. This right here, this issue I submitted on 12/12, so December 12th of 2019. It's coming up on a month since this was submitted. Now, in that month was Christmas and New Year's, a couple of big holidays where a lot of people had a lot of time off. So it's not something where people have been able to probably get to it yet. There's a lot of people in the world, and a lot of people use Visual Studio, and a lot of people submit bugs. So with this, just note that the team is working on this. I know some of the people on the team, I know how hard they work on getting these problems resolved. They have a lot of success moving bugs through from submission through a release. So don't get discouraged if it takes a little time. They're not just ignoring you. Now, note down here, I have one was submitted that said closed, lower priority. What does that mean? It means that my issue, while it may have been an issue, was not something where they're going to work on resolving because it's not a big enough issue. It's not something that affects enough people. And you know what? That's going to happen. So don't get discouraged. Don't think they're ignoring your issues. It's just that this one in particular wasn't one that was important enough. Sometimes that's hard to hear because to me, my issues are very important. They affect me. But maybe they only affect me or only me and 20 or 30 other people, which seems like a lot until you think of the thousands upon thousands of people who are using Visual Studio. Then maybe not so much, especially since maybe it's not something we can reproduce, or maybe it's not something that happens all the time, or maybe there's a workaround. If any of those are true, then it's not really that big a deal. So therefore, it gets closed as a lower priority. You have to deal with that. Now, I also submitted a bug down here where they looked at it and said, yep, that's a bug, and fixed it. And they actually fixed it really fast. So sometimes when you find something, they go, yeah, that needs to be taken care of. That's a high priority, and we'll take care of that right away. And again, the clearer you are, the more likely it is they'll understand the problem and know how to resolve it. So in this case, within 3 months, the fix had been placed into a production version. Within 3 months. That's actually really fast because Visual Studio is not something that moves every week with a new version. Okay? Now, let's go to our problem right here. Let's click on this, and you can see information about this problem, like voting is not available because you reported this problem. I can't vote on it. Others could. If others had the same problem, they can vote on it as well. You can also come down here, though, and comment. So, for example, I could write a comment here and explain anything further that I have found. And I've done this. I've corresponded with the team. So, for example, back here, let's look at the completed one. If you'll notice the comments, there's 10 comments. Let's look at those comments. And also notice that it is resolved with the latest preview version in May, which is only about a month after I submitted it. So even though it took 3 months to be in a production version, it's only 1 month from reporting to in a preview version. But the comments here, notice they start off, they talked about the information, and then there's an update. I responded to the update, and then they responded, and this is actually another person. So this person was a little frustrated because they had an issue and it seemed like it wasn't being paid attention to. And so we had a conversation, had a great conversation about it. And meanwhile, Visual Studio comes back with, okay, there's been an investigation. Here's a fix. I tested the fix and it resolved the issue. That's very important, because if they're going to do work for you and help you resolve an issue, you need to be able to do the work to test it. Don't just expect them to do all your work for you. You have to be involved in this process. So when they say, hey, we think we got a fix, can you try that? So try it out by installing the latest preview. Okay, I did that, and it resolved the issue. Okay? So this is the process for submitting a bug. So I had the bug over here. I reproduced the bug. I documented what I did to try and fix the bug that didn't seem to fix the issue. So it wasn't just my machine, hopefully. And it still could be, but I don't think it is. Then I submitted the issue, which is here right now, and then I will continue to poke at this. I'll continue to try different things out and see if maybe, one thing or the other might resolve this issue. And if it does, I will post comments in here and let them know. All right? Once I get feedback from the team saying, okay, we resolved this problem, if that's what happens, then I'm going to test that and make sure it does work the way they expect it to. Because maybe it doesn't. We've all written code we thought would fix something, and it doesn't. So it's great to test it on the machine that actually had the issue. Now, if they come back and say, you know what, this is a low priority issue, or hey, I think it's a personal issue on your machine, it is what it is, okay? So if I have access to another machine, which I do, I can go on a different machine and try it and replicate the steps. If I can replicate them, I can come back here and kind of push back a little bit, respectfully. And I will say, hey, you said that this was probably on my machine only. I tried on a different machine just now, and it's still not working. And then that can kind of push them back on, oh, it's not just a one machine issue. Maybe it's a profile issue. Maybe it's my profile. Or maybe it's a plugin that I have. Or maybe it really is a wider issue that hadn't gotten the right testing for it. And maybe I can reproduce it and give them the source code that reproduces it. Okay? These are all things you can do to be part of the process of helping fix Visual Studio. This process is pretty similar for features that you suggest. Okay? Now, I haven't suggested any features directly through this tool yet. But if you suggest a feature, it's the same kind of thing. Now, this took, interestingly enough, that's kind of a bug, I think. It took my crash information and put that as a suggested feature. But if you suggest a feature and you get feedback from the team, you get that email saying, hey, what about this? Talk it through. Again, be as clear as possible. And the reason I'm pushing this, and the reason I'm saying do all this work, is because Visual Studio is a great tool that can be better. Every tool has bugs. Every tool has shortcomings. But you have the opportunity, we have the opportunity to make this a better tool. And the way to do that is to report problems and suggest features. And do so in a clear manner that is understandable and is respectful. Again, remember, these are real people behind this application, not a faceless corporation. These are people. Treat them with kindness. By doing this, you will make the tool better for yourself, for your team, and for everyone else. So I highly encourage you, use these tools. Don't just expect somebody else to do all the work. Do some of the work yourself. Be a part of this community. Make this better for all of us. All right? So that's how you submit a bug. That's how you follow up. That's how you get the work done and hopefully get something resolved or get a feature added into Visual Studio. That's all for now. I just want to make sure that I got that out there, and hopefully that will help you and help all of us. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.